an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Drachenfels. Act 4 in its entirety. In this section, another person is murdered horrifically, and another guy makes himself explode in a truly unexpected twist, and also the Emperor arrives with the prince and whatnot. There's a lot happening here. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle in the chat says, quote, "I'll just commission Drachenfels. We can get through it in no time. Then Dandelion Dynasty Book 3 will be out in January. Me in 2019, a fool and knave." I forget, Kyle, what was the updated release for Dandelion Dynasty? November of this year. Okay. Well, I guess then the commissions are booked up through October at this point. So probably in another month, it's going to be time to start looking at it. The end of October, actually, now that I think about it. So yeah, shortly. I wonder how long it's going to be. This is not the Dandelion Dynasty episode, I'm sorry. But I am curious about it because I want to make sure I have time to re-listen to the second book, at least like the second half of the second book, and prepare and get my my facts straight, because it'll have been quite a while by then. So yeah, these chapters, guys, I still can't get quite used to the gruesomeness of this book. And it's unlike anything else I've covered in that respect, except I have recently I've recently started covering another Will White series. He's the author of Cradle, and it's called Elder Empire. And recently, a chapter that I covered, they are on an island made of flesh that has been like gouged to mine for things and is bleeding, and there are like tendons and stuff stretching across the sort of quarry. And that one was a pretty close second to the kind of like body horror that this book has. I have to say, even in as much as a lot of what happens in this book is more brutal, I think Elder Empire grossed me out more, because it was not just a description of it from afar. It was people having to be in it and amongst it with no choice in the matter, which is a little different than finding out secondhand what Drachenfels did to somebody at another time, or seeing a body but not being forced to engage with the body. You know what I'm saying? So I am finding myself to be quite a baby, actually, when it comes to this. I had no idea that I was going to be this like tender-hearted about it, or tender-stomached, really. And I'm very leery about what Act 5 will bring, because it has been steadily increasing in intensity. And I have to imagine that Act 5 is going to be all the worse, you know? So, all right, let's start with Act 4, with Detlef. I have to say, guys, Detlef is such a... I don't want to say fop, because that implies something very different. He's so puffed up at the start of the book. And I didn't even believe a lot of the stories he was telling about himself. I realize now, at the time, I think I simply didn't grasp the scope of the stories in this book. So I think actually, I assumed him to be lying or speaking in great hyperbole at times when I think he might have been pretty honest and accurate, actually. And as the story continues, I keep being gratified by him. He is a good dude in a lot of ways. You know, he's like, yeah, vain and at times certainly pompous in his way, but overall has fairly sound judgment. And I think that he has some compassion that, you know, I didn't really give him credit for. And in this section with his friend being accused of murder, I really admired his forbearance. He can't help but ask, did you do it? But there's a sense to him of shame in asking at all, and feeling like, personally, while I understand some people who would be like, well, if you don't trust your friend enough that you actually have to ask, then you can't. But the thing is, I admire somebody who is willing to face that we don't always know everything we think we do about somebody, no matter how close a friend they may seem. And anyone is capable of anything. I firmly believe that, depending on the circumstances of the event. So whenever somebody tries to immediately, like, say, oh, my friend here, or my boyfriend, or my wife would never hurt a fly, they would never do such a thing, my instinct is always to be like, okay, come on. Because Owen is one of the gentlest, kindest people I have ever known. And I am absolutely certain that he could fuck somebody up if the circumstances were right. So even in the fact that Detlef goes ahead and asks, did you do it? Even there was some, like, respect from me in that he was willing to face that at all, you know? So I keep being surprised at how much I have grown to like him. And if there turns out to be some kind of twist where it turns out that, like, Detlef is actually somehow the bad, forgive me, I'm going to move my mic a little bit closer, by the end of this, I'm not kidding, I'm going to be pretty devastated about it, because I just want him to be the voice of reason throughout all of this. So, Chapter 1 of Act 4. Detlef was not sleeping well. He had retired early, not wishing to be pulled back into the mundane business of the company and the play after having seen what was left of Rudy. Now, he lay awake in bed, wishing, and as he had done more than once since this thing began, that he was back in his cell at Munson Keep. Which, y'all remember that cell. I remember that cell, and it has been a minute since we read those chapters. And the fact that he's wishing to be back there is just a testament to how incredibly bad the situation is for him. Which, again, a bit of respect for me, because that speaks to compassion as well as a healthy fear. I wasn't sure, like I had said before, about how he would interpret what happened with the monks that he saw. And I was worried that he was going to write it off as a dream or something, you know, but no. He is perfectly willing to believe that some bad shit has gone down and he wants nothing to do with it. And I just admire a person who has some fucking pragmatism here. At least, Sarada, I can't say this name, Zaradat had been someone to hate, and he could see Sarada, understand his petty nastiness. There weren't any phantom monks pointing their ghostly fingers in Munson Keep, and there weren't any fat-taking, eyeball-gouging killers either. And, I mean, you know, he's not wrong. This is all correct. So, he just can't sleep, laying there thinking about how there is definitely somebody in and amongst them that is doing these things. Perhaps one of the company, perhaps not. And the only thing that he is able to take comfort in is the fact that the play is coming along actually pretty well, which feels less like it has to do with him than he seems to want to believe. That's not to say that I don't believe that this man is good at his craft. I simply think that there is a certain amount of magic involved in all of this that is forcing things to come together, because that is the aim and desire of whomever is orchestrating this. Kyle says, one of the best parts of Detlef as a protagonist is that he's just a guy. I find fantasy protags who aren't action heroes to be fascinating. Yeah, 100%. And don't get me wrong, I love me an action hero, but it is kind of fun when there's a person who feels a bit out of their depth all the time. And, that can be portrayed in various ways without them just being an ordinary person. But Detlef he isn't somebody with very much power, despite the fact that he's in charge of the play. So he can't, just go ahead and call this off. I mean, you know what? I say that, and I actually don't know that to be true. Maybe he could. But he doesn't have any abilities, He's not a vampire, or what other classes of people are there in this universe. He's just a dude, as Kyle says. So it just sort of grounds everything. And it also is a nice way to relate as you're reading this, because he reacts to a bunch of ghostly monks flying in his window the way that most of us would, which is to say he shits himself. I mean, that seems fair. Laszlo Lowenstein was a revelation. When the play transferred to an Altdorf theater, Detlef would insist that Lowenstein go with the package. Yeah, no. Sorry, guy. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but that man's possessed and or being taken over, or the thing with him, we'll get to it. You know what? I'm saying we're going to get to it. I'm going to let us get to it. I was about to just say, we'll get to it and then talk about it right now. Let me just stay on track here. So, Detlef can't stop thinking about Genevieve. And within this act, he goes off with her and she sucks his blood. It's implied to me that there's sex that goes along with that, but it's not actually explicit. It's much more explicit about the blood sucking. And the description of the blood sucking feels very reminiscent of swallowing cum to me, because it says something about how it being warm and salty and hitting the back of her throat. And I was like, okay, I think I know what this is here, but that's fine. But, go on with your bad self, Detlef, because he is clearly into her. And despite the fact that she is a bit distracted by Oswald, it has lessened considerably since things began. So he doesn't have to fight for her attention the way that he initially would, or was worried he would have to. Let's see. And Detlef wished Oswald were here already. He had bested perils of this place once. Furthermore, Detlef hoped the Crown Prince would be interested to find out what Crowley was doing in his name. Crowley is, I am assuming, just a regular shitty human being. Because it's tempting to see in Crowley some kind of orchestration of everything, but I don't know that that's fair. That said, the person who's dealing with Laszlo, we still don't know their identity, right? So, for all I know, that's fucking Crowley, and he's sort of doing playing two roles here. I don't know. So, Genevieve comes in at this point. She knocks on the door. She doesn't come in. He wouldn't let anybody come in because there's a chair under the door handle and all this stuff that he has to go and disable before he can even open it. And she tells him that what is it that she says? You must come out. There are strange things happening here by night. This puzzled me a little bit. And this is probably, it's puzzling because I am not a vampire. And so the instinct to handle shit this way does not compute for me. She's clearly aware that there is some unsavory shit going down. And rather than either just investigating it by herself or, getting, like, notifying as many people as possible so as to keep everyone safe. She goes to this guy and asks him to just come with her and investigate it by themselves. And I do not believe that this means that she's in on it in any way, but there was a part of me that just was like, is this really the best way to do this? You know, just the two of them walking into what is very clearly like an active crime scene, he has like a silver knife, a dagger to defend himself with, and that is it. And he isn't, as far as I know, any kind of fighter or anything, right? So were there to be some sort of combat, he would probably, knife or no, be pretty useless. I just didn't feel like this was the way to handle the scheme. On the way there, she says, I can feel things. It comes with what I am. There's a great disturbance in this place. When we came here, it was clear, empty, but something came along with us and has taken up residence. Something old, something evil. The 27th wagon. Genevieve stopped and looked at him, puzzled. Remember, we could never get straight the number of wagons in the caravan? There were supposed to be 26, but whenever we weren't looking, there seemed to be 27. If what you're talking about came with us, perhaps it came in that wagon. That could be so. I should have thought of that at the time. I assumed you were just being artistically inept. This is one of those things that I really appreciate him setting her straight on what it takes to actually manage this kind of production and the company, because I swear to God, I would take such offense to this sort of like the whole artistically inept, especially it being framed like that. There is some truth, of course, to people who are artistic being somewhat disorganized. I mean, that can happen. But when you have to do something of this scale, I think it's very difficult for people to grasp just how much has to go into the organization of it to keep it all off the ground. Like, it, I even take offense, like, I was with some friends at the lake a few weekends ago, and they had brought some of their acquaintance that I had never met. And one of them, we were out in the water hanging out, and they were talking about what we do for a living. And somebody asked me about the podcast and whether I was like doing this full time and if I could make a living off it. And I was talking about how people will pay like to commission me to read things. And everybody, and this is a common reaction, and this doesn't offend me because I feel the same way, frankly. Every time somebody hears that I am like booked so far in advance and that people are willing to pay $45 an episode, they stop and basically, in so many words, ask, well, who the hell are you and why would anybody want to hear what you have to say? And like I said, that doesn't offend me because who the hell am I? I am nobody. I'm not. I just am somebody that like has done this consistently for a long time that people have gotten to know, and I can be funny and I can be insightful, but I'm not trying to pretend that I'm any like prodigy. I'm not a genius, you know, I'm just decent at my job and I have worked at it for a long time. But at the same time, as much as I don't take offense to people being like, well, who the hell are you? Immediately, that sort of like insinuation, I don't even remember how it was worded, was followed up by somebody saying, hell, I mean, maybe I should go into that. I can talk about a TV show for an hour. And they said it in such a dismissive, like, your job must be nothing kind of way. And I just wanted to be like, I would love to see you do it. I just want to put the camera on you and see how you handle being live for an hour alone, talking about whatever. Because there is an assumption of it being incredibly easy. And me being a person of distinction, that I will not argue. Of course I'm not. But that's not the same thing as my job being easy at all. And I think that people frequently will get in touch with me about wanting to start a podcast and what all needs to go into it. And they will ask a couple of questions, and it will become very clear quickly that people do not really grasp all that goes into doing a show regularly. They don't understand the editing and all of the hosting issues and dealing with a website and all of, there is so much behind it just to do one show. Never mind, I'm doing 11 a week, and then every other week I do 12. So, it's the kind of thing that I really do get very irritable when it's insinuated that just because my job is watching TV and reading and then talking about it, that's all there is to it, or that it's simple. I mean, it is simple, that it's easy. Because God knows how many TV and book podcasts there are out there. But, a lot of them are unlistenable because this is a kind of skill. And I just really felt for him in that moment when she was like, oh, I just figured you fucking didn't know what you were doing. And I was just like, really? Why would you think that? He's got a million things that he's keeping track of. Yeah, you're not directly responsible for stuff, but the thing about hiring people to assist you is that you also have to keep an eye on them. You can't assume they're doing their job. You do have to check in on them. And you have to select good people to be your assistants in the first place, folks that you can actually trust. So that also is a skill, figuring out who to put in what position. And he responds with, oh, thank you very much. It takes a lot of ineptitude to stage a major play, let me tell you. If it weren't for Bruegel, I'd be plowed under with work. It's not all writing and play acting. There are finances and accommodation arrangements, and you have to feed all these people. There's probably more organization involved than in a military campaign. And I could easily believe that. I mean, any stage manager for a play in which you don't even have to worry about the accommodations of the actors, stage managers know that's a 70-hour-a-week job. It just is. You have to manage absolutely everything. So, now that I'm off my soapbox about that, I just had to. I had to say something because I was just kind of like, what the fuck, Genevieve? Especially considering how old she is. I would really think that she would have a little bit more sensitivity on this sort of thing. So, I love this as they're walking out into the darkness. He asks what we're looking for, and she says, it could be anything, but it's big, it's disturbed, and it's not friendly. I'm really glad you told me that. And he's watching her, and there's this moment where he's wondering, did she bring me out here so that she can suck my blood? And he doesn't get scared. He gets sort of excited and interested, and he's just like, I haven't done that, but I've read about it, and I would be interested. They get interrupted as he puts his hand on her waist by a chanting. And what's sort of wild here is that there's shadows in the room where the chanting is taking place, but they aren't able to make out anything specific. There were lights beyond the door and people moving in a confined space. And I'm like, are there? I'm not certain there are people. I mean, there may be, but there's a part of me that felt like nothing was actually there. I feel like there might have been a spirit or somebody was doing something from afar. And I would be very surprised if they positioned themselves in such a way without any precautions to not be seen or snuck up on. And I think that all of this either is part of the plan or it was so inconsequential if they were discovered that because they had created a sort of decoy with this, that it wouldn't matter either way. But I may be wrong about that. So, at this point, they see Manesh, who is the dwarf with the one arm. And poor Manesh he has been fully skinned, but he is still alive, and his guts are like writhing around. This is one of those things that I don't know if you guys have seen, and I'm certain that this is like exaggerated slightly for the internet, but I saw something recently about how they have these like large sort of what I keep comparing them to mentally are the stands that you use to hang a potted plant on like a porch or something. I'm using them as a centerpiece for my wedding to hang lanterns from. But they're basically big sort of like inverted shepherd hooks. And when they're doing abdominal surgery and they need to get the intestines out of the way, they hang the intestines on these hooks to be held up and off to the side. And they writhe around while the work is being done because they're still, they're still functioning. And sometimes their movement is so violent that they'll just flop right off of one of the hooks onto the floor, which I can't get over sometimes how advanced we are, like in medicine and technology. And yet we still have like wild shit like that feels incredibly lo-fi happening, Same thing with like, oh yeah, what do we do to like get through somebody's ribs? Well, first of all, we'd go in with like basically a tiny like chainsaw and fucking spread their ribs open to be cracked. Like there's very little finesse considering what I would expect, and it always makes me very anxious, and I don't look forward to getting older and having to face some of these sorts of procedures myself. So Genevieve sees this, and at first her instinct is to jump in on it, and he has to hold her back, and she kind of gives him a look, but realizes really quickly he's right. This is not the fucking time. The two of them are by themselves. God knows how many people are even in there. They can't see well enough to tell. And at this point, Crowley comes in. And this for me was very suspicious. Crowley immediately being like, what are you two doing here? I was like, oh, what are they doing here? What are you doing, man? Like, I don't know. I feel like Crowley might be being set up to seem suspicious when in fact he's just an asshole. Because that's a real easy thing, I mean, that's what Snape's whole deal was, is that we always thought the worst of him because we simply didn't like him. And he was actual garbage, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't what we thought. And with Crowley, I can't tell if he is just an asshole or if he's part of this whole thing. So they decide to bust in on this, and let's see, Crowley, let's end this thing now. The steward considered a moment or two. Very well. Detlef stood back and let the first pair of Crowley's bully boys crash through the door, knocking it off its hinges. The heavy wood fell with a gust that extinguished the black candles. The chanting and music shut off suddenly, and there were cries in the dark. Some of the voices were human. Detlef rushed into the room. As he stepped through the portal, the candle he was holding went out, and he found himself in total darkness. He had the feeling of being in a vast, exposed plain under a starless, moonless night sky. He stepped in something soft and wet and heard a groan that told him what it was. Then he was buffeted this way and that by heavy bodies. There were screams and the noise of weapons clashing. He was lifted bodily from the ground and thrown across the room. He collided with someone and went down, his arm twisted under him. So all of this, it's just such utter confusion. And I wouldn't believe anybody who tried to claim they knew exactly what went down here. Eventually, the lights come up, and they're able to find a secret exit because nobody can understand how somebody could have escaped from this room with all of them in here and not reveal their means of escape. And they look around and eventually are able to find this, when they tried the ceiling, a stone receded above a blade and a whole section of the wall swung inwards. And they immediately here, Crowley says this would be a fine escape route for a dwarf. Which I'm like, Crowley, are you in on this? Because it really feels like he is setting this dude up. And as we know, that dude isn't even actually a dwarf, but that's a whole other thing. I'm sorry, guys. I kicked my little space heater. So, Detlef was upset to notice the footprints in the new-made corpse's stomach and thought better of looking at his own slipper. Oh, God, no thank you. So they follow the way, and there's a moment where they notice that there are small, like, eye holes cut in the walls, and they realize that these are probably behind some of the portraits, so that this is like a real sort of haunted mansion kind of vibe, where they can look out upon everybody from inside the walls. I don't know why this cracked me up so bad, but it just felt so... It felt simultaneously really creepy and really hilarious, you know? And they come across like a suit of armor with a skeleton in it, and the skull has been exploded from the inside. No, thank you. Let's see. I believe we have our killer. There was blood on the carpet. It petered out after a few feet outside a door. There was a red smear on the knob. Don't you think that's just a bit too convenient? Asked Detlef. Besides, there was more than one person chanting. And he says, first let's take our man, or whatever he is. Which again, he has it out. You know, like, he just does. So they open the door, and Varg Bruegel is jumped out of bed. Crowley looked at him and gasped. Detlef pushed through and felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. His friend and advisor looked up at him and threw eyes in his chest and hands, but it was the look in the eyes in his face that struck through to Detlef. Bruegel, the monster, was crying. And I still am not entirely certain. Is he crying because he's aware he's been set up? That he knows precisely what's happening here? Because I know that his mutations have sort of given him an advanced sense. And I assume that he has sort of sussed out what's happening here. At the same time, I'm like, man, I wish they were giving you those senses a little bit sooner so that you could have, like, you know, gotten the hell out of there before they even got to your room. But that whole thing just goes very poorly, as we will see. So, chapter 2, we go to Karl Franz, and this whole section, now I am going to need you, Kyle, to help me out with this. Karl Franz is the Emperor's son and heir, right? And Oswald is the prince? Okay. Kyle says he's the emperor currently, I believe. Okay, my bad. Their 12-year-old son and heir was reveling in the freedom of the Force. Okay, right. So that is his son. Oswald is called like a prince a couple different places, but I couldn't tell if that was real because I had thought Oswald was going to be basically the equivalent of the emperor. I didn't realize that there was an emperor. I'm sure that in previous episodes I had figured this out and mentioned it, but it's, like I said, it's been a while, so I have forgotten a lot of things by now. And I did not remember that an emperor existed, that there was like a higher authority. I thought Oswald was in the position to be the guy. So he's not. And the fact that the Emperor is with him and coming to Drachenfels seems like extremely bad news, because that's going to put everybody in a real quandary if and when he dies. Okay. Kyle says, Oswald is in charge of one of the imperial provinces. This setting is based on the Holy Roman Empire, so it's a bunch of states that elect an emperor. Wild. Okay, cool. So he's just sort of looking around at the variety of ways that folks of different temperament react to being on the road. Some people like to sleep outside and enjoy the sort of camping aspect and are much more athletic and interested in the wilderness. And then there are people who are like, we've got a bed built in this carriage that we're going to sleep in that is like just as comfortable as our bed at home. Thanks for the offer of sleeping on the ground with a thin blanket, but no thanks. We're going to take the feather bed. And I would like to state for the record, I am absolutely of that latter category. I used to be able to do sleeping on the ground when I was a teenager. Not happening anymore, kids. No, sir. I can't even imagine being able to fall asleep. I would have to be absolutely exhausted, which I'm sure trekking through these mountains, it probably would be sufficient to, make me that tired by the end of the day. But they're on horseback a lot. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't. So let's see. Aside from Oswald, who rode as if born on a horse and could bring down a pheasant with a single crossbow bolt, the only elector who seemed entirely comfortable on this journey was the elder of the halfling Moot, who spent most of his time eating or laughing. Now, are we talking halflings like hobbits? Is that... All right. I didn't know that other properties kept a hobbit race, but that's fine. And Johann gave the impression that he had seen things which made pleasure trips like this petty by comparison. He wore his scars like medals and didn't talk much. And I'm like, all right, well, he sounds like a badass. All right, cool. And this basically is just a little bit of them talking and joking about their situation, him sort of razzing his son a little bit. And they talk about, father, but surely the Emperor Hajalmar was assassinated for being appallingly ill-suited to the throne rather than for his shortcomings as a family man. Well learned, my son. Now clean your face and have your tea before I abdicate in favor of your little sister and cut you out of the succession. And people laugh, and he can really tell the difference between the laughs they laugh when they're just doing what they think they're supposed to because he's the emperor, and the laughs that they laugh when they actually think that he has said something amusing. And I appreciate that he can tell the fucking difference, because a lot of men can't. It's like wild how many men can't. So this is when his son asks about the monks and is like, well, what's the deal with those anyway? And he's like, the monks? I don't know what you're talking about. And he describes the exact figures that Detlef saw himself. And he says something about how I figured that probably you knew who they were, and for some reason felt immediately so sleepy that I just climbed back into my tent and went to sleep. And I was like, ooh, man, can they affect you like that, where they just make you decide to ignore them because you're so tired? So let's see. Drachenfels killed many in his time and was enchanter enough to make his sway over his victims last beyond their death. Their spirits clung to him and became his slaves. Some even became his followers. They were supposed to be seen in habits like monks. Even after their master's death, they are rumored to cling together, to form an order in the world of ghosts. We travel to the fortress of Drachenfels, and evidently the great enchanter's victims ride with us. And I'm like, that, for me, is just every time that I hear that he was able to do shit beyond death to these people, it's such a horrible prospect. At least in death, you're free. And allegedly, that is not true with this guy. And I really hate that a lot. A lot. So, we start off with the next day. Somebody tried to tell Detlef that it'll look better in the morning, and Detlef lost his temper and knocked the guy's teeth out, a couple of them. He wakes up in very ill humor. And everybody is sort of guessing as to who the murderer is. while Crowley has already started torturing Bruegel, and nobody has seemed to notice that Bruegel isn't around, so they're all still theorizing. You know, eventually it will be made clear who the alleged perpetrator is. I appreciate Detlef immediately being like, dude, it was the most obvious setup. Are you kidding me? He says something like a 9-year-old would have seen through it. And I was like, yo, that is a really good line. I appreciate you, Detlef. Like, he's so insulting about it. And sometimes somebody deserves to be insulted in that way. I feel like this a lot, honestly. And I have this all the time with people where I'm just like, how can you not see what is so obvious in front of your face? You're falling for the, like, clearest okie doke I've ever heard of. What? So yeah, he goes in and he sees Von Bruegel being tortured. This guy is punching the shit out of him with, like, mailed hands. And he also has the eyes, like, on his chest and torso. A couple of them have been gouged out. And I'm just like, man, what the fuck? And I understand being repulsed by this dude because he's freaky sounding, like wildly so. But it's obvious that Crowley has just decided that it's this guy and that he's the perfect fall guy. Crowley either is doing it on purpose because he knows other people won't care, or he's so personally bigoted that he has decided that it's likely that it is Bruegel. It's hard to tell what is actually believed by him and what is simply being put forward as an easy explanation. I really can't separate the two. And let's see. Yeah. He says, I think that's what if he's not the murderer? I think that's unlikely given the evidence, don't you? And he's like mocks the evidence of the bloody doorknob. I was not referring to the bloody door, Mr. Cirque. I was referring to this monstrous abortion, this creature of chaos. Mouths around Bruegel's waist snapped open, long tongues darting out. The torturer cried out, "That stings!" Blue wheels rose on his arm. "You'll be dead in 3 days," said Bruegel, his voice remarkably unaffected. The torturer started back, raising his hand to strike. Then panic filled his eyes. He grabbed his arm as if to squeeze out the infection. "You can't possibly know that, Bruegel," Detlef said. "You've never stung anyone before." Bruegel laughed, liquid rattling in his throat. "That's true." The torturer looked relieved and cuffed Bruegel viciously. Look, as hilarious as this little back and forth was, can't Detlef just let Bruegel have this moment for a second? Just let the torturer think he's going to die in 3 days. Just continue with that because it's amusing. Please, just let him have it. Don't blow his cover up, you know? I know that what Detlef is trying to say is basically like, he's trying to be like, you have never attacked anyone despite what they may think of you. But at this point, the ship has sailed, Detlef, and I know that you want them to reconsider this. It's too late, my guy. Like, he's up in this already with a bunch of eyes gouged out. Let's see. Kyle says, a bit of context. Chaos is one of the capital E evils of this setting, and guys like Bruegel are usually not as nice as he is. Okay, that is helpful to know, because from my end, I just don't, I couldn't understand his immediate reaction to this, and I couldn't tell how many people knew or understood what was even happening to him. And I mean, to his credit, Bruegel even says later on to Detlef once they're alone, I didn't kill the guy. I'm pretty sure I didn't kill the guy. But I have been having unnatural urges and changes of personality that are not, due to my own... I'm not doing it. Something is taking control of me, and I think it would probably be better if I just went ahead and died before that change is complete, which is what leads him to doing what he does. Let's see. You stuck by me all through the history of Sigmar. You think I'm going to desert you just because you're a... He groped for the word. Bruegel gave it to him. A mutant. That's what we're called these days. Yes, I'm a creature of chaos. Look at me. Bruegel pulsated, strange organs emerging from his torso. This is wild to me. It's not just that he is like slowly changing, which is the impression that you get in the last chapter from the last section of him noticing various like new mutations. It's like happening so quickly that he can't keep track of it. It's wild. I really would like to know what happens if he just lets it continue, you know? And Detlef asks if it hurts, and he says, sometimes, but I don't actually have to feel pain if I don't want to, so it can be kind of pleasant. And he said that he was able to, like, turn off the pain from this torture. Otherwise, he probably would have confessed to everything. And I've always been disgusted at what I was. It's nothing new. I don't blame you at all. You're the only one who ever gave me a chance. I'm going to die soon, and I'd like you to know how grateful I've been for your friendship. Vargr, I won't let Crawley kill you. No, you won't. I have the choice whether to live or die. I can stop my heart, tear it apart with the teeth I have inside my chest, and I intend to do it. Which, he does kill himself, but he doesn't do it that way. And it's much worse than I expected. So, yeah, he says at this point, my mind is changing. I have impulses. The warp stone warps minds as well as bodies. I've been misremembering things, having strange ideas, desires. I'm altering severely. I could go to the wastes and lose myself in the hordes of chaos, join with all the other monsters, but I'd not be me anymore. I don't think I want to leave behind what I am about to become. So, yeah, he draws a great breath, inflating himself as Crawley comes in. Then he burst. Detlef stood back to avoid the splatter. The torturer fell over, putting a hand into the brazier of hot coals to steady himself. He screamed as his hand was roasted through. Bruegel fell apart with a great sighing. As he died, Vargr Bruegel said, "Good luck with the play." It's a pretty good way to go. That's very dramatic. I like it. So then we have the Imperial party arriving at the castle. And I appreciated that the next day, like, the company is already sort of missing Bruegel, and despite what he was, people seem to have affection for him. They bury him and do, you know, a nice little funeral for him. And for his part, Detlef keeps, like, an eye on Crawley and is like, I am going to fucking get you back for this. He really blames Crawley for this, which he fucking should. Like, I am not mad at him for that. So then we see that the play is finally finished. They do an entire rehearsal, and he doesn't change a single line. And he does this big speech, encouraging and also, like, you know, upbraiding people if they need it. The only person who's just not great is Lily. And he says something about how her blank expression could be interpreted as like the undead, except that if you actually know Genevieve and how vivacious she comes across, it doesn't actually suit her personality at all. So the Emperor comes in. Detlef doesn't exactly know how to, you know, greet him, but does his best and seems to pull it off. And let's see. Vargr Bruegel was innocent of any crime. I assure you this will not end here. This is Oswald. Steps will be taken. You will be heard. So the next, like, few chapters are taken up a lot by the introductions of different people, the learning of their personalities, mostly through Genevieve, who is sort of like watching and trying to sense what folks are like. She has that ability innately anyway, but she does use some just regular conversation as well as her abilities to be able to tell. There's a moment where Detlef is with Oswald, and he's like, Detlef feels a little bit annoyed, I think, that Oswald is more consumed with the memories of the murders of friends that had happened so many years ago than he is concerned with what's going on right now and the danger that everybody seems to be in at the moment. And let's see. Anton Vate was preparing to leave Drachenfels. So this guy can see what the pattern is, and he is just, you know what? I have to get the fuck out of here. And the thing with him is he takes this back way out, which is not the way to do it, but I understand why he does. Basically, what is said is he can't be certain that he wouldn't be stopped were he to try and leave in a visible way. He doesn't think that he would be kept here against his will, but he can't lay money on it. And as far as he is concerned, there is no fucking way he is going to stay a second longer. So he has to try and do this under cover of night, going through back ways in order to take I think the cliff path, they say, which is the way that they came in the first time. And that was the first moment where I was like, all right, you said you saw the pattern, but the fact that you are going to go try and leave by the way that y'all came, when everybody who came the first time are the ones that are dying, to me says you don't quite get it. I would avoid anything remotely touching the events of the past that this is clearly about. But he's just so desperate to get out that he doesn't really stop and think this through. So let's see. Vate intended to cling just a little longer with just a little more tenacity. And he is, he is on his way out, and his health is really bad. It's sort of implied that he has like lung cancer, I think. It's unclear. It says he was feeling the crab now, feeling it shift inside him. I don't remember this, Kyle. Can you refresh me on this? Is this something that we knew about? Because I don't know if we're meant to, or if the crab is meant to be like a metaphor for something, or the like slang for something that I'm not remembering. His heart hung like a stone in his chest, and his joints pained him. He was certain he was bleeding inside his clothes, which I was like, what? He had to stifle coughing fits lest his noise attract the guards, or even less welcome presences. Okay, Kyle says it's implied to be cancer because he smokes a lot. The crab is metaphorical. Okay. Because it says, like, feeling it shift inside him, and I was like, is there something alive in him? Oh my God. But okay, I get it. So he's walking and he's having a hard time. And all of a sudden he feels like wet on his face. And he touches his hand to the graze and he finds it bleeding. The wound made by the gargoyle's horn had opened again. So this is an old wound. And it really seems in this moment not that he isn't understanding what's happening, although that's certainly true. It's more that everything happened so fast that he doesn't have a chance to stop and consider how little sense it makes. He stumbled trying to force himself forward and fell headlong. And then he feels a dart hit him. The shaft was bent, but the head was embedded deep in muscle. He made a fist around the dart and pulled, but it slipped through his fingers and he was holding nothing. He couldn't get a strong enough hold of the shaft to get it out of his leg. And I was like, is that dart actually there? I kind of feel like this is in his memory or something, like, or an illusion. I don't know. I feel like this isn't actually happening to him the way he thinks. I think it's a combo of the magic and his memories sort of getting too confused. And this is when he sees the people that have been killed already hanging out in the passageway with him, but they don't look like themselves. They look like the murder victims, you know? They have their, like, bodies cut open and all of this stuff. The man in the mask, the man who was not quite Drachenfels, but who would do for the moment, the man who wanted Vete's eyes, he realized he had found the spot at last, and that refers to earlier on how he was saying he tried to find the spot where Drachenfels fell, and he couldn't find it. But there it is. So then we go to Genevieve, and this is the chapter where she's just learning about everybody at this the feast. She talks to a baroness's daughter, Clotilde. I'm going to call her Clotilde. Who is, you know, she's very young and very concerned with dates and dancing and dressing and whatever, which, you know, I was also exactly this way. And the girl doesn't realize Genevieve's age at all, because I keep forgetting Genevieve looks like she's like 14 years old. So she has a sort of patronizing attitude toward Genevieve because she thinks that she's her elder and educating her in the world, when in fact shit is not what it looks like. And later on, when somebody mentions Genevieve's age in front of her, she like spills wine on herself because she's so shocked, and gets as far away from Genevieve once they're free to leave and roam around as she can. The Countess Emmanuelle was endeavoring to outshine everyone in the room, and Clotilde had already rhapsodized about her 20-foot train with its embroidered tracings of the imperial family tree and the intertwining line of von Leibowitz, her necklace of 300 matched sapphires, and her plunging cloth of gold bodice. Genevieve assumed the Countess's tight clothes were padded. No real woman could fill out that much whalebone and silk. I was really curious what she meant by that, because I assure you, I can fill out plenty of whalebone and silk, and I'm real. But I think she means that her curves are so, like, intense. Essentially, she's looking at her the way that a modern woman would be like, oh yeah, she's got implants. You know, like, that's my interpretation of this moment. And there's this other woman who is sort of trying to compete with Countess Emmanuelle. Lily Nissen. Oh my God, I forgot it was Lily. I thought for some reason it was some other, like, noblewoman. But no, it's Lily Nissen. And the two of them both look equally as tasteless and uncomfortable. And they act affectionate with one another while being obviously completely at odds and trying to outdo each other. And this is the kind of thing that I always, like, I know that this behavior does exist, but I can't imagine still caring at that point in my life, you know, about, there's just a point at which, like, don't you have better shit to worry about? Maybe not. Noble women didn't have a lot to do, I suppose. So Clotilde got as far away as possible, and Genevieve felt a little sorry for the girl. Luitpold was attentive now. Let's go and see Daddy. He can't stand Middenheim and Talabheim. He'll want to be rescued. So she, again, is looking around at everybody, seeing that Lily Nissen is trying to get somebody's attention and doesn't seem to be succeeding. And Genevieve is realizing that as much as she is 600-something, she feels like a kid in watching all of the subtleties of the relationships here, because it's just not really how she needs to see the world or how she needs to relate to things anymore. So it feels so far outside of herself that she just she can't relate, you know? And I do understand how that could happen. You start to just not really feel like a person because they're cares and dreams and desires aren't going to have any relevance to your life at all. And she dances with Luitpold, and she sort of has a moment of really admiring the fact that even though he is next in line, he has no sort of excitement about becoming emperor. He is very in the moment, enjoying the dancing, enjoying the hunting, and just enjoying his youth. And you can feel this sort of nostalgia from her over it. At this point, Detlef comes and interrupts, and the two of them go off together, and this is when she bleeds him for the first time. So then we get the last chapter. Constant Drachenfels stared at his masked face in the mirror. Is this a new title? Constant Drachenfels? I feel like I don't remember this. And it says he was so close to the attainment of his purpose. He pulls a mask off his face and eventually returns to being Laszlo Lowenstein. Kyle says it's not new. It's been used a couple times. Okay. And he's being congratulated by people at how great his performance is. But once they leave, he begins to take the makeup off because it turns out that his face is transforming even under the mask, and people aren't aware of that. He's covering it up. The changes were mainly under the skin, but soon the new bones would poke through. Soon he would truly fill the armor of the great enchanter. The man in the mask stood over a corpse, arms casually folded, unattended by any of his ghosts. It's just so casually dropped. Lowenstein is simply not part of the human race anymore at this point. He has checked out, kids. The bones, said his patron. This time, we need the bones. Lowenstein's knives worked quickly. He filleted Anton Veit expertly, carving away the flesh, and soon had the skeleton unclothed, which I was like, why did you say it like that? I hate it. Just like, what? It's not like you're unzipping a onesie. And he also does take the eyes. And the other man says, a fine job, Lowenstein. We have it all nearly. The heart, the flesh, the skin, the vitals, the bones. From the vampire lady, we shall need the blood. And from the Grand Prince, from the murderer of the enchanter, the man in the mask paused. From him, Lowenstein, from him we shall take everything. And I'm just like, I don't want that to happen to Oswald because he seems like a nice boy. But also, I do kind of want to see what happens. I can't tell. With Lowenstein transforming as he is he consuming, like either eating or consuming via magic somehow, what parts they're taking from all the victims? Or is he turning into Drachenfels a whole separate thing from whatever they're doing with all of these parts? And look, I know that you can't spoil me, Kyle. I'm just thinking out loud what could actually be going on here. But yeah, it's a really wild, it creeps me out bad. It really does. I just hate it. I don't know what to make of it. That's the thing that, there are so many things that could be going on here. I mean, it's obvious in the simplest sense that Drachenfels is still out there and making an attempt to come back. Whether the man in the mask, and I mean not Lowenstein, although Lowenstein also wears a mask, but this guy is a different man in a mask. If he himself is Drachenfels is unclear. I don't think he is. Otherwise, why would Lowenstein be appearing to transform into Drachenfels? I don't know. I just don't know what's going on. And there's only one act left. Only 40 pages. It's only 40 pages, but there's 15 chapters in Act 5. It looks really long. It's just not. It's deceptive. So yeah, I'm going to be wrapping up on this book pretty shortly. Let's see. The next recording is Tuesday, August 31st. So a couple weeks out. Shortest break yet, and I am very excited to find out what the fuck goes down. I genuinely have no idea what could be going on, so I guess we'll find out. But thank you, Kyle, very much for commissioning through to the end of this book. I'm glad that I'm going to be able to finish it, and I hope that you guys have all enjoyed the coverage of it, despite me being a giant baby. And I will see you all again soon with that last episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.